The autumn rain hammered against the tall windows of Thornfield Palace as King Alexander stood in his private study, holding a letter that would change everything. For 30 years, he had ruled the kingdom of Valdoria alongside Queen Isabella, their marriage a cornerstone of stability for the nation. But the contents of this letter, discovered hidden in Isabella's private desk, revealed a truth so devastating that it shook him to his core. Alexander's hands trembled as he read the correspondence again. The elegant handwriting belonged to Lord Marcus Whitmore, Isabella's childhood friend and trusted advisor. What had seemed like innocent friendship had been revealed as something far more sinister. The letters detailed not just an affair that had lasted for over a decade, but a conspiracy that threatened the very foundation of the monarchy. "Your Majesty has been a fool," Isabella had written to Marcus in one particularly damaging letter. "He trusts so easily, believes so readily in the goodness of others. While he concerns himself with the welfare of peasants and trade agreements, we have been building our own empire within his empire. Soon, the crown will pass to our son, and you will rule through him as I have ruled through Alexander." The king's mind reeled as he processed the implications. Prince Henry, whom he had raised as his heir, might not even be his biological child. The thought cut through him like a blade, not just for the personal betrayal, but for what it meant for the succession and the stability of Valdoria. A soft knock interrupted his torment. "Enter," he called, hastily folding the letters. Princess Elena, his daughter-in-law and wife of Prince William, stepped into the study. Her genuine warmth and grace had always been a comfort to Alexander, especially during the increasingly cold periods when Isabella seemed distant and calculating. Elena's dark hair was pulled back simply, and her blue eyes held the kind of sincerity that had become rare in palace life. "Father Alexander," she said, using the affectionate title she had adopted after marrying into the family. "I wanted to discuss the upcoming charity gala for the children's hospitals. I know you've been under tremendous stress lately, and I thought perhaps I could help shoulder more of the responsibilities." Alexander studied her face, seeing none of the artifice that had become so familiar in Isabella's expressions. Elena genuinely cared about the people of Valdoria, spending her days visiting hospitals, schools, and community centers. Unlike Isabella, who attended such events only for the photographs and public relations benefits, Elena formed real connections with the citizens. "Elena, sit please," Alexander said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I find myself in need of counsel from someone I trust completely." Elena settled into the chair, her expression growing concerned. "Of course, Your Majesty. Whatever troubles you, perhaps we can find a solution together." Alexander hesitated, knowing that once he shared this burden, there would be no turning back. But, looking at Elena's honest face, he realized that she might be the only person in the palace he could trust with such devastating news. "What would you say if I told you that everything we thought we knew about our family might be built on lies?" he asked carefully. Elena's brow furrowed. "I would say that truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply buried, and that sometimes the most painful revelations can lead to the most necessary changes." Her words struck him powerfully. Here was someone who spoke with wisdom beyond her years, who understood that leadership sometimes required making the most difficult choices imaginable. "There are documents," Alexander began slowly, "evidence of betrayals that go to the very heart of the crown. If what I've discovered is true, then I have been living a lie for decades, and our kingdom has been manipulated by those closest to the throne." Elena leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Queen Isabella?" Alexander's silence was answer enough. Elena's expression shifted from surprise to a steely determination that reminded him why Prince William had been so drawn to her strength of character. "What evidence do you have?" she asked practically. Alexander pulled out the letters, spreading them across his desk. As Elena read, her face grew pale, but her composure never wavered. When she finished, she sat back in her chair, processing the magnitude of what they faced. "The DNA tests mentioned in the final letter," she said quietly. "Have you verified them?" "Dr. Harrison confirmed their authenticity yesterday," Alexander replied, his voice heavy with the weight of the revelation. "Prince Henry shares no genetic material with me. He is Lord Marcus's son." Elena was quiet for a long moment, clearly understanding the implications for the succession, for the kingdom, and for Alexander personally. When she spoke, her voice was firm and clear. "Then, we have a responsibility to the crown and to the people of Valdoria to address this deception," she said. "But we must be strategic. Moving too quickly could destabilize the monarchy itself. Alexander felt a surge of gratitude for her measured response. Where Isabella would have schemed for personal advantage, and where many others might have panicked, Elena was thinking about the greater good. "I've been considering my options," Alexander said. "Isabella must be removed from her position immediately. The question is how to do so without creating a constitutional crisis." "And Prince Henry?" Elena asked gently. "Cannot inherit a throne that was never rightfully his to claim," Alexander replied firmly. "The crown must pass to Prince William, as it should have all along if not for Isabella's manipulations." Elena nodded slowly. "William will be shocked, but he'll understand the necessity. He's always put duty before personal comfort." Unlike his half-brother, Alexander observed bitterly. "Henry isn't entirely to blame," Elena pointed out fairly. "He was raised believing he was the rightful heir. The fault lies with those who deceived him as much as they deceived you." Her compassion, even in this moment of crisis, reinforced Alexander's growing conviction that Elena possessed the qualities of leadership that Isabella had always lacked. Where the queen saw people as pieces to be manipulated, Elena saw them as individuals deserving of truth and justice. "I want you to take on a larger role in the monarchy," Alexander said suddenly. "Not just as William's wife, but as a leader in your own right. The people trust you in a way they've never truly trusted Isabella." Elena looked surprised. "Your Majesty, I'm honored, but surely there are protocols." "Protocols can be changed," Alexander interrupted. "What matters is surrounding myself with people of integrity. I've spent too many years accepting Isabella's counsel while she worked against everything I believed in." As if summoned by their conversation, the study door burst open without ceremony. Queen Isabella swept in, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour, her green eyes flashing with anger. "I heard you were meeting privately with Princess Elena again," she said coldly, her gaze moving between them suspiciously. "I hope you're not filling her head with ideas above her station." The audacity of her words, given what Alexander now knew about her decades of betrayal, filled him with a rage he struggled to contain. But Elena's presence helped him maintain his composure. "Isabella," he said evenly, "Elena and I were discussing her expanded role in upcoming state functions." "Expanded role?" Isabella's voice sharpened. "I wasn't consulted about any changes to palace responsibilities. Since when have you concerned yourself with actual palace responsibilities rather than just their appearance?" Alexander asked, unable to keep all the bitterness from his voice. Isabella's eyes narrowed as she detected the shift in his tone. "Alexander, what's gotten into you? You're speaking as though we're adversaries rather than partners." "Partners?" Alexander repeated, the word tasting bitter. "Is that what we've been, Isabella?" Elena shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension building to a dangerous level. "Perhaps I should leave you both to discuss this privately," she suggested diplomatically. "No," Alexander said firmly. "Stay, Elena. What I have to say concerns the future of the monarchy, and you're part of that future." Isabella's composure cracked slightly. "Alexander, you're being dramatic. Whatever's troubling you, we can resolve it without involving. Princess Elena has my complete trust." Alexander cut her off. "Unlike some others in this palace, she has never given me reason to question her loyalty or honesty." The implication hung heavy in the air. Isabella's face went pale as she began to understand that something fundamental had shifted. "What are you suggesting?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander stood, moving to the window where he could see the lights of the capital city stretching into the distance. Those lights represented millions of people who had trusted him to lead with honor and integrity. They deserved better than the web of lies that had entangled the crown for decades. "I'm suggesting that tomorrow, we begin the process of setting things right," he said without turning around. "The truth has a way of surfacing," as Princess Elena wisely observed. Behind him, he heard Isabella's sharp intake of breath and Elena's steady, reassuring presence. The confrontation he had dreaded was beginning, but for the first time in years, Alexander felt he had a true ally by his side. The storm outside showed no signs of abating, and Alexander suspected that the tempest within the palace walls was only just beginning. The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace gardens as Alexander walked the familiar paths he had traversed for decades. The events of the previous evening weighed heavily on his mind. Isabella had stormed out of his study after their confrontation, her parting words echoing ominously. "You'll regret this, Alexander, more than you can possibly imagine." Elena had remained behind, offering quiet support as he grappled with the magnitude of the decisions ahead. Her presence had been a balm to his troubled spirit, reminding him that not everyone in the palace harbored hidden agendas or secret loyalties. Now, as Alexander approached the secluded rose garden where he often found solace, he discovered he was not alone. Prince William sat on a stone bench, his usually composed demeanor replaced by obvious distress. At 28, William had inherited his father's sense of duty and his mother's, his real mother's, gentle strength. "Father," William said, rising as Alexander approached. "Elena told me you wished to speak with me privately." Alexander nodded, gesturing for his son to sit back down while he took the adjacent bench. The roses around them were entering their final bloom of the season, their beauty tinged with the melancholy of endings, fitting, Alexander thought, for what he was about to reveal. "William, what I'm about to tell you will shake the very foundations of everything you believe about our family," Alexander began carefully. "But it's time you knew the truth about the crown you're destined to inherit." Over the next hour, Alexander shared everything: the letters, the DNA evidence, the years of deception that had shaped the succession. William listened in stunned silence, his face growing paler with each revelation. When Alexander finished, they sat quietly for several minutes, the gravity of the situation settling between them. "Henry," William said finally, his voice hoarse. "Does he know?" "Not yet," Alexander replied. "But he must be told, and soon. The longer this deception continues, the more damage it does to the crown's legitimacy." William stood and began pacing, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture that reminded Alexander painfully of his own younger self. "The people love Henry. He's been groomed for the throne his entire life. How do we possibly explain that it was all built on a lie?" "With honesty," Alexander said firmly. "The people of Valdoria deserve a crown built on truth, not deception. Yes, there will be turmoil, but the alternative, allowing this fraud to continue, would be far worse." "And mother," William caught himself. "Isabella, what happens to her?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "She has forfeited any claim to the crown through her actions. The question is whether we handle this as a family matter or allow it to become a public scandal." Before William could respond, they heard footsteps on the gravel path. Elena appeared, her usual serene expression troubled. Behind her walked Henry, his golden hair catching the morning light, his bearing as confident as ever. Alexander felt a pang seeing him. Despite everything, he had raised this young man as his own son. "Father," Henry called out as he approached, his tone carrying an edge Alexander hadn't heard before. "Mother tells me you've been making some rather dramatic declarations. I think it's time we cleared the air." Alexander exchanged glances with William and Elena. The moment of truth had arrived sooner than anticipated. "Henry," Alexander said carefully, "please sit down. There are things you need to know." "I prefer to stand," Henry replied coldly. "And I prefer the truth. Mother says you're planning to alter the succession, that you're elevating Elena above her proper place in the family hierarchy." Elena stepped forward diplomatically. "Your Highness, perhaps we should." "Don't," Henry cut her off harshly. "I've watched you insinuate yourself into positions of influence for months now. Father has always been susceptible to attractive women with seemingly noble intentions." The insult hung in the air like a physical blow. William stepped protectively closer to his wife, while Alexander felt his composure slipping. "You will not speak to Princess Elena in that manner," Alexander said, his voice carrying the full authority of the crown. "She has shown nothing but loyalty and honor to this family." Henry laughed bitterly. "Loyalty and honor? Is that what you call undermining the rightful heir? I know about your private meetings, your discussions of expanded roles. Did you think I would simply step aside while you rearranged the succession to suit your preferences?" Alexander realized that Isabella had been working behind the scenes, preparing Henry for this confrontation while painting Elena as the villain. The depth of her manipulation was staggering. "Henry," Alexander said, his voice growing gentler, "the succession isn't being rearranged for my convenience. It's being corrected based on the truth." "What truth?" Henry demanded. Alexander pulled the letters from his jacket pocket, the same ones that had shattered his world the night before. With a heavy heart, he handed them to Henry. "Read these," he said quietly. "All of them." Henry's confident expression faltered as he began reading. Alexander watched his face transform from arrogance to confusion to horror as the reality of his parentage became clear. The letters painted a picture not just of betrayal, but of a young man who had been used as a pawn in Isabella's larger game. "This can't be true," Henry whispered, his hands shaking as he held the final letter, the one confirming the DNA results. These must be forgeries. Dr. Harrison verified everything yesterday, William said gently, moving closer to his half-brother. I'm sorry, Henry. We all are. Henry's composure cracked completely. The golden prince who had been groomed for greatness since birth suddenly looked very young and very lost. Everything I've been told, everything I've worked for, it's all been a lie. Elena, despite Henry's earlier insult, stepped forward with characteristic compassion. Your worth as a person isn't diminished by this revelation. You're still part of this family, still loved. Loved? Henry's voice cracked. I'm the product of my mother's adultery and my father's. He looked at Alexander with anguish. You're not even my father. Alexander felt his heart breaking for the young man he had raised. Biology doesn't determine love, Henry. I raised you. I guided you. I watched you grow into a man of intelligence and capability. That doesn't change. But the crown changes, Henry said flatly. Everything changes. Before anyone could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps drew their attention. Isabella emerged from the garden path, flanked by Lord Marcus Whitmore and several palace guards. Her face was set in determined lines, and Alexander immediately sensed that she was making her final play. Alexander, she said, her voice carrying across the garden with regal authority, I demand that you cease this harassment of our son immediately. Our son, Alexander replied, his voice deadly quiet. After what I've discovered, you still dare to claim him as ours. Isabella's chin lifted defiantly. Those letters prove nothing conclusively. Even if there were indiscretions, Henry remains the crown prince by law and tradition. Lord Marcus stepped forward, his presence confirming everything the letters had revealed. Your Majesty, he addressed Alexander with mock formality. Queen Isabella is correct. Whatever personal grievances you may have, the succession cannot be altered without proper legal procedures. Alexander noticed that the guards accompanying them wore expressions of uncertainty, clearly uncomfortable with the situation unfolding before them. These were men who had served the crown loyally for years, now caught between competing claims to legitimacy. Legal procedures? Alexander's voice rose. The law requires legitimate birth for succession. Henry's legitimacy is precisely what's in question. Accusations and forged documents, Isabella said dismissively. You've allowed your judgment to be clouded by your inappropriate attachment to your daughter-in-law. The accusation was so outrageous that for a moment, Alexander was speechless. Elena's face flushed with indignation, while William stepped forward protectively. That is enough, William said firmly. You will not malign my wife's character to cover your own crimes. Isabella's eyes flashed dangerously. Crimes? I have committed no crimes. I have served this crown faithfully for 30 years while your father chased his naive ideals of public service. Faithful service? Elena spoke up, her voice steady despite the tension. Is that what you call decades of deception and manipulation? Isabella turned her cold gaze on Elena. You dare lecture me about service to the crown? You, who has worked systematically to undermine the rightful succession. The rightful succession, Alexander interrupted, his patience finally exhausted, belongs to my legitimate heir, Prince William, not to the product of your adultery with Lord Marcus. The words hung in the garden air like a thunderclap. The guards shifted uncomfortably, clearly beginning to understand the true nature of the crisis unfolding before them. Marcus finally spoke, his voice carrying a note of desperation. Your Majesty, these allegations are serious enough to require investigation by the royal court. Until such proceedings conclude, surely the status quo should be maintained. Alexander recognized the delaying tactic for what it was, an attempt to buy time, while Isabella consolidated support among nobles who might benefit from Henry's reign. There will be no delay, Alexander declared with finality. The evidence is conclusive, and the crown's integrity cannot be compromised further. Henry, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly stepped forward. Stop, he said, his voice carrying a pain that silenced everyone present. Just stop. All eyes turned to him as he struggled to compose himself. If the DNA evidence is accurate, if these letters are genuine, then the crown was never mine to inherit. He looked directly at his mother. Was any of it real? Did you ever love father, King Alexander, or was it all just part of your plan? Isabella's composure wavered for the first time. Henry, you don't understand the complexities. I understand that I've been living a lie, Henry cut her off. And I understand that continuing this charade would make me complicit in destroying everything the crown represents. Marcus moved toward Henry, his voice urgent. Your Highness, don't be hasty. There are ways to challenge these findings, ways to protect your rightful place. My rightful place. Henry's laugh was bitter. My rightful place is wherever truth and honor lead, not where ambition and deception have carried me. Alexander felt a surge of pride in the young man he had raised, even as his heart broke for him. Despite the devastating revelation about his parentage, Henry was choosing integrity over personal gain. What happens now? Elena asked quietly, her question directed to Alexander, but carrying the weight of everyone's uncertainty. Alexander looked around the garden at the faces before him. William, steady and prepared for the responsibility he had never expected to inherit so soon. Elena, graceful under pressure and committed to the crown's welfare above her own. Henry, struggling with shattered illusions but choosing honor despite his pain. Isabella, defiant even in the face of exposed deception. And Marcus, calculating his next move even as his conspiracy unraveled. Now, Alexander said firmly, we begin the work of restoring integrity to the crown, regardless of how painful that process might be. The morning sun had risen higher, burning away the shadows that had hidden so much darkness for so long. The truth was finally emerging, but Alexander knew that the hardest battles still lay ahead. The royal council chamber had never felt more imposing as Alexander prepared for what would undoubtedly be the most consequential meeting of his reign. Ancient portraits of previous monarchs gazed down from gilded frames, their painted eyes seeming to judge the crisis that threatened to tear apart centuries of tradition. The massive oak table, worn smooth by countless historic decisions, would today bear witness to revelations that could either strengthen or destroy the monarchy. Elena stood beside William near the tall windows, her presence a steadying force as they waited for the other council members to arrive. Over the past 3 days since the garden confrontation, she had proven invaluable in helping navigate the delicate political implications of exposing Isabella's deception. Her suggestions for managing the crisis had shown a sophisticated understanding of both palace politics and public sentiment that impressed even the most senior advisors. The Duke of Westmere has arrived, announced Sir James Worthington, the king's private secretary, his usually unflappable demeanor showing signs of strain, as have the Archbishop and the Chief Justice. Alexander nodded grimly. These men represented the 3 pillars of royal legitimacy: nobility, church, and law. Their support would be crucial for whatever emerged from today's proceedings. Duke Richard of Westmere entered first, his silver hair and dignified bearing commanding immediate respect. Behind him came Archbishop Thomas Aldridge, whose moral authority had guided the kingdom through numerous crises, and Chief Justice Lord Michael Hartwell, whose interpretation of royal law would ultimately determine the succession's validity. Your Majesty, Duke Richard said formally, though his eyes betrayed deep concern. We understand you've called this emergency session to address matters of succession. Indeed, Alexander replied, gesturing for everyone to take their seats around the table. What I'm about to reveal will challenge everything we've believed about the royal line. I ask only that you listen with open minds and remember that our duty is to the crown's integrity above all personal considerations. As Alexander began laying out the evidence, the letters, the DNA results, the timeline of deception, he watched the faces of these powerful men transform from skepticism to shock to grave concern. Elena had suggested presenting the facts chronologically, allowing each revelation to build upon the last, and the strategy proved devastatingly effective. Archbishop Aldridge was the first to speak after Alexander finished. Your Majesty, if these allegations prove accurate, we face not just a crisis of succession, but a crisis of moral legitimacy that strikes at the heart of our constitutional monarchy. The legal implications are equally serious, Chief Justice Hartwell added, his scholarly demeanor troubled. Prince Henry's claim to the throne rests entirely on his presumed legitimacy. If that presumption is false, then, legally speaking, he never had any claim at all. Duke Richard leaned forward, his political instincts clearly analyzing the broader ramifications. And Queen Isabella? Her actions constitute treason of the highest order if proven true. They are proven true, Alexander said firmly. The question now is how we address this betrayal while preserving the stability of the realm. Before anyone could respond, the chamber doors opened unexpectedly. Isabella swept in, flanked by Lord Marcus and Prince Henry, her bearing regal despite the circumstances. She had clearly been listening outside and had chosen this moment to make her entrance for maximum dramatic effect. Gentlemen, she said with icy composure, I trust you'll forgive the interruption, but I understand my character and actions are being discussed in my absence. Alexander felt his jaw tighten. Isabella, this is a closed session of the Royal Council. And I am the Queen of Valdoria, she replied sharply. I have every right to defend myself against whatever calumnies are being spread. Elena stepped forward diplomatically. Your Majesty, perhaps it would be appropriate for all parties to present their perspectives. Isabella's eyes flashed as they fixed on Elena. How generous of you to grant permission in my own palace. Though I suppose you've grown accustomed to overstepping your bounds. The insult landed with obvious intent, designed to provoke Elena into an undignified response. But Elena's composure remained unshaken, her response measured and gracious. I seek only what's best for the kingdom and the crown, Elena replied calmly. As I'm sure we all do. Archbishop Aldridge intervened before Isabella could respond. Your Majesty, Queen Isabella, these are serious allegations that require serious consideration. If there is evidence to contest, please present it. Isabella straightened, her voice taking on the commanding tone she had perfected over decades of public appearances. Gentlemen, what you're witnessing is a coordinated attack on the rightful succession by those who seek to benefit from chaos. These so-called letters could easily be forgeries. The DNA tests could have been tampered with. And the word of a disgruntled monarch against his lawful wife hardly constitutes proof. It was a masterful performance, Alexander had to admit. Isabella had always possessed an uncanny ability to present herself as the victim even when caught in wrongdoing. Lord Marcus stepped forward to support her claims. Your Graces, I've served this crown loyally for over 20 years. The suggestion that I would engage in such conspiracy is not only false, but insulting to my family's centuries of service. Henry remained silent throughout these exchanges, his face a mask of barely controlled emotion. Alexander could see the young man struggling with the competing loyalties that were tearing him apart. Chief Justice Hartwell consulted his notes carefully. Your Majesty, Queen Isabella, while character testimony is valuable, we cannot ignore physical evidence. The letters in question have been examined by our finest document analysts. Their authenticity appears genuine. Appears? Isabella seized on the word. Surely such momentous decisions require absolute certainty, not mere appearances. Duke Richard leaned back in his chair, his political acumen evident in his careful words. The crown faces two equally dangerous paths, proceeding on uncertain evidence, or ignoring evidence that may be genuine. Both carry enormous risks for the stability of the realm. Elena cleared her throat softly, drawing attention. When she spoke, her voice carried quiet authority. Your Grace, might I suggest that the evidence itself, while compelling, is only part of our consideration? The integrity of the crown depends not just on legality, but on moral authority. Archbishop Aldridge nodded approvingly. Princess Elena raises an excellent point. Even if legal questions remain, the moral implications of these allegations create doubt that cannot be ignored. Moral implications? Isabella's voice rose with indignation. What moral authority does she claim? A commoner who married into this family barely 3 years ago, now presuming to lecture us about crown integrity. The attack was vicious and personal, clearly designed to undermine Elena's growing influence. But it backfired spectacularly when Henry suddenly spoke up. Enough. His voice carried across the chamber with surprising force. Whatever Elena's origins, she has shown more honor in 3 years than some who were born to royalty have shown in 30. The rebuke to his mother was unmistakable, and Isabella's face went pale with shock. Marcus moved closer to her, offering silent support, but the damage was evident. Henry continued, his voice growing stronger. I've spent 3 days reviewing every piece of evidence, questioning every assumption I've held about my life. The truth is painful, but it's still the truth. Alexander felt a surge of pride watching Henry struggle toward the right choice despite enormous personal cost. Henry, Isabella pleaded, you're the rightful heir. Don't let their manipulation cloud your judgment. Henry looked at his mother with profound sadness. If I am the rightful heir, then the DNA evidence should support that claim. It doesn't. Chief Justice Hartwell spoke carefully. Your Highness, are you prepared to accept the validity of the genetic evidence? Henry's silence stretched for long moments as everyone waited. Finally, he nodded slowly. I cannot in good conscience claim a throne that was never rightfully mine. The crown belongs to Prince William. The admission sent shockwaves through the chamber. Isabella staggered as if physically struck, while Marcus's face darkened with fury. You fool, Marcus hissed at Henry. You're throwing away everything we've worked for. The slip was catastrophic, confirming everyone's suspicions about his involvement in the conspiracy. Duke Richard's eyebrows rose sharply, while the Archbishop's expression turned thunderous. "We, Lord Marcus?" Alexander's voice was deadly quiet. "Please explain what you and Queen Isabella have worked for." Marcus realized his mistake too late, but the damage was irreversible. "Your Majesty, I misspoke in my concern for Prince Henry's future." "You spoke truthfully for perhaps the first time in years," Elena observed coolly. "You've just confirmed that this was indeed a coordinated deception." Isabella drew herself up with desperate dignity. "I will not stand here and be accused by someone who has systematically undermined my authority from the moment she arrived." "Your authority," Alexander said, his patience finally exhausted, "ended the moment you betrayed your marriage vows and your oath to the crown. You are no longer Queen of Valdoria." The words fell like a physical blow. For 30 years, Isabella had held the title that defined her identity, her power, her very sense of self. The reality of losing it all seemed to hit her with devastating force. "You cannot simply dismiss me," she said, though her voice had lost its commanding edge. "The law requires proper proceedings." Chief Justice Hartwell consulted his legal texts. "Actually, Your Majesty has the authority to revoke titles in cases of proven treason. The evidence suggests sufficient grounds." Archbishop Aldridge nodded gravely. "The Church cannot continue to recognize a marriage built on such fundamental deception." Duke Richard, ever the political strategist, addressed the practical concerns. "The question becomes how to manage this transition while minimizing damage to the monarchy's reputation." Elena stepped forward with a proposal she had clearly been considering. "Perhaps we could frame this as Queen Isabella choosing to retire from public duties due to personal reasons, while quietly arranging for Prince William to assume greater responsibilities as heir apparent. It was a face-saving compromise that would allow for a gradual transition while avoiding the full scandal of public exposure." Isabella looked at Elena with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect for the political sophistication of the proposal. "And if I refuse this generous arrangement?" Isabella asked coldly. Alexander's voice carried the full weight of royal authority. "Then, the truth becomes public. Lord Marcus faces charges for his role in the deception, and you face the consequences of treason against the crown." The stark choice silenced the room. Isabella understood that her only path to avoiding complete disgrace lay in accepting the compromise Elena had suggested. Henry spoke into the silence. "Mother, please, accept their offer. Salvage what dignity remains." Isabella looked at her son, the product of her greatest deception, and saw only disappointment and loss. The golden prince she had created to secure her legacy was rejecting everything she had sacrificed to give him. "Very well," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will consider retirement from public duties." As the formal proceedings began to arrange the transfer of power, Alexander caught Elena's eye across the chamber. Her wisdom in suggesting a face-saving compromise had potentially prevented a constitutional crisis that could have destroyed the monarchy entirely. The old order was ending, but perhaps something stronger and more honest was beginning to take its place. The transformation of Thornfield Palace over the following weeks was subtle but unmistakable. Where once Isabella's influence had permeated every aspect of royal life, Elena's approach brought a warmth and authenticity that seemed to breathe new life into the ancient halls. Staff members who had grown accustomed to walking on eggshells around the former queen now moved with renewed confidence and purpose. Elena stood in the blue drawing room, reviewing preparations for the upcoming state dinner with visiting dignitaries from the neighboring kingdom of Astoria. Unlike Isabella's extravagant affairs, which prioritized appearance over substance, Elena focused on meaningful cultural exchange and genuine diplomatic progress. "Your Royal Highness," called Lady Margaret Thornton, the palace's chief of staff, approaching with a stack of correspondence. "The seating arrangements have been finalized according to your preferences, and the menu has been adjusted to accommodate Ambassador Kowalski's dietary restrictions." Elena smiled, appreciating the attention to personal details that made guests feel genuinely welcomed. "Excellent, Lady Margaret. Has Prince William reviewed the talking points for his speech?" "He has, Your Highness, and he asked me to tell you that your suggestions regarding the trade agreement were particularly insightful." The compliment warmed Elena's heart. Working alongside William to prepare for his expanded role as heir apparent had strengthened their partnership both personally and professionally. Unlike the competitive dynamic that had characterized Alexander's relationship with Isabella, Elena, and William functioned as true collaborators, each bringing unique strengths to their shared responsibilities. A soft knock at the door interrupted her review of diplomatic protocols. Alexander entered, his bearing noticeably lighter than it had been in months. The burden of living with Isabella's deceptions had taken a toll that was only now becoming apparent as it lifted. "Elena," he said warmly, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything urgent." "Never, Father Alexander," she replied, using the affectionate title that had become natural between them. "I was just finalizing details for tomorrow evening's dinner." Alexander's eyes scanned the carefully organized notes and seating charts spread across the mahogany table. "Your attention to detail never ceases to impress me. Ambassador Kowalski mentioned to me yesterday how much he appreciated your personal note about his wife's recent recovery from illness." "Diplomacy begins with treating people as individuals rather than political chess pieces," Elena replied. "Something I learned from watching you interact with citizens during public events." The observation pleased Alexander enormously. Where Isabella had always seen public duty as a burden to be endured for the sake of maintaining power, Elena understood it as an opportunity to serve something greater than herself. "There's something I wanted to discuss with you," Alexander said, settling into one of the silk-upholstered chairs. "The Royal Council met yesterday to formalize William's new position as Crown Prince. There was unanimous agreement, but they also raised questions about your own role moving forward." Elena set down her pen, giving him her full attention. "What kind of questions?" "The traditional title of Crown Princess carries certain limitations that don't reflect the scope of responsibility you've already undertaken," Alexander explained carefully. "Duke Richard suggested creating a new designation that would formalize your authority in diplomatic and domestic affairs." The proposal was both exciting and daunting. Elena had never sought power for its own sake, but she recognized the opportunity to make meaningful changes in how the monarchy engaged with both its own people and the international community. "What did you tell them?" she asked. "That the decision ultimately rests with you," Alexander replied. "But I hope you'll accept. The kingdom needs leaders who understand that true strength comes from service, not self-interest." Before Elena could respond, commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Raised voices, one of which was unmistakably Isabella's, grew louder as they approached the drawing room. "I demand to know why my personal belongings are being moved without my consent." Isabella's voice carried clearly through the door. Lady Margaret's calm response followed. "Your Majesty, the items are being relocated to your new quarters as previously arranged." The door opened abruptly as Isabella swept in, her face flushed with anger. Behind her trailed Sir James Worthington, clearly attempting damage control. "Alexander," Isabella said sharply, "I will not tolerate being treated like a dismissed servant in my own home." "This ceased to be your home when you chose to betray everything it represents," Alexander replied evenly. "The arrangements for your relocation to Rosemary Cottage were agreed upon by all parties." Isabella's gaze shifted to Elena with unconcealed resentment. "I suppose this was your suggestion? Remove the inconvenient former queen to make room for her replacement." Elena maintained her composure despite the venom in Isabella's tone. "The arrangements were designed to provide you with privacy and dignity during your transition to private life." "Dignity?" Isabella laughed bitterly. "You speak of dignity while systematically erasing 30 years of my contributions to this crown." Alexander's patience, already strained, reached its breaking point. "Your contributions? Shall we review them? Decades of manipulation, adultery, fraud regarding the succession, and systematic undermining of everything this monarchy should represent." "I served this crown faithfully," Isabella began. "You served your own ambitions," Elena interrupted quietly, her voice carrying more authority than Isabella's shouting. "There's a difference between service and scheming." Isabella whirled to face Elena directly. "You sanctimonious little, that's enough." The voice belonged to Henry, who had appeared in the doorway. Over the past weeks, he had begun the painful process of rebuilding his identity separate from the lies that had shaped his upbringing. The change in him was remarkable. Where once stood an entitled prince certain of his destiny, now stood a young man grappling honestly with difficult truths. "Henry," Isabella said, her tone softening as she appealed to her son, "surely you can see what they're doing to us." Henry looked at his mother with profound sadness. "What I see is the consequences of choices made long before I was born. Choices that used me as a weapon against the very family that raised me with love." The words cut Isabella visibly. Everything I did was for you, to secure your future. No, Henry replied firmly. Everything you did was to secure your own power. My future was never yours to steal from William. Isabella staggered as if struck. In losing Henry's support, she had lost her last claim to moral authority within the family. Your Majesty, Sir James interjected diplomatically. Perhaps we could arrange for your departure at a more convenient time. My departure? Isabella's voice cracked. From my own home. Alexander stood, his voice gentle but final. Isabella, Rosemary Cottage is comfortable and private. You'll have a generous allowance and freedom to pursue whatever interests you choose. But your time as queen is finished. Elena moved closer to Alexander, not in triumph, but in solidarity. The cottage has beautiful gardens. I think you'll find peace there, away from the pressures of public life. The gesture of kindness, coming from the woman who had replaced her in both position and Alexander's affections, seemed to break something inside Isabella. For the first time since the crisis began, her mask of regal composure cracked completely. Peace, she repeated hollowly. Is that what you call exile? I call it a chance to start over honestly, Henry said quietly. Something we all need to do. Isabella looked around the room at the faces watching her. Alexander, resolute in his decision. Elena, compassionate but unshakable. Henry, lost to her through her own machinations. And the staff members who had once deferred to her every whim, now waiting patiently for her to accept reality. Very well, she said finally, her voice barely audible. I'll leave quietly. But don't expect gratitude for your mercy. As Isabella swept from the room for the last time as queen, an era ended. Alexander felt the weight of 30 years of deception finally, lifting from his shoulders. Elena moved to the window, watching as servants began loading Isabella's belongings into carriages bound for Rosemary Cottage. Do you think she'll find happiness away from all this? Alexander joined her at the window. I hope so. Despite everything, she deserves a chance at peace. Henry lingered in the doorway, clearly struggling with his own uncertain future. Elena noticed his hesitation and addressed him gently. Henry, you'll always have a place in this family. Your parentage doesn't change the love that raised you. But it changes everything else, he replied. My entire identity was built around being the future king. Who am I without that? Alexander turned from the window to face the young man he had raised as a son. You're someone with intelligence, compassion, and the opportunity to define yourself by your own choices rather than others' expectations. That's more freedom than most princes ever experience. The wisdom in Alexander's words seemed to resonate with Henry. For the first time in weeks, his expression showed hope rather than despair. Perhaps, he said slowly, I could travel, see the world beyond palace walls, discover what I might contribute outside of royal duty. Elena's face brightened. That's a wonderful idea. And you'd be welcome back whenever you choose. Family doesn't end because circumstances change. As Henry left to consider his options, Alexander and Elena remained by the window, watching the last of Isabella's belongings disappear down the palace drive. No regrets? Elena asked softly. Alexander considered the question seriously. About exposing the truth? None whatsoever. About the pain it caused? Many. But necessary pain is different from meaningless suffering. Elena nodded, understanding the distinction. And now? Now we focus on rebuilding, Alexander replied, creating a monarchy worthy of the trust placed in it. As evening approached, Elena prepared to return to her planning for the state dinner. But Alexander's voice stopped her at the door. Elena, he said, the council's proposal about expanding your role, I hope you'll consider it seriously. The kingdom needs leaders who understand that power should serve people, not the other way around. Elena smiled, feeling the weight and privilege of the responsibility being offered. I'll consider it, but only if William agrees. We're partners in everything. As she left the drawing room, Alexander remained by the window, watching the sun set over the capital city. For the first time in years, he felt optimistic about the future of the monarchy. Truth had proven stronger than deception, love more enduring than manipulation, and integrity more valuable than inherited power. The new era was beginning, built on foundations that would not crumble. 6 months after Isabella's departure from Thornfield Palace, the Kingdom of Valdoria experienced a renaissance of public trust and international respect that few had thought possible. The state dinner that Elena had planned with such careful attention to detail had exceeded all expectations, resulting in a historic trade agreement that benefited both kingdoms while strengthening diplomatic ties across the region. Elena stood on the palace balcony overlooking the capital city, its lights twinkling like earthbound stars in the gathering dusk. Below, citizens moved through their evening routines, unaware that their princess was watching over them with genuine care and concern for their welfare. The weight of her new role as crown princess and special envoy for diplomatic affairs had proven challenging but deeply rewarding. Admiring your kingdom? William's voice carried warmth and affection as he joined her on the balcony, slipping his arm around her waist. Our kingdom, Elena corrected gently. And, yes, I never tire of seeing how vibrant it's become. The new education initiatives are already showing results in the outer provinces. William smiled, still marveling at how naturally Elena had embraced responsibilities that would have overwhelmed many. Her common origins, once whispered about as a liability, had proven to be her greatest strength in connecting with ordinary citizens who finally felt heard by their royal family. Father wants to speak with us, William said. He's in his study, and he seemed particularly pleased about something. They found Alexander reviewing correspondence at his desk, his expression more relaxed than either had seen it in years. The constant tension that had marked his final years with Isabella had been replaced by the confidence of a ruler who no longer doubted the loyalty of those closest to him. Ah, perfect timing, Alexander said, gesturing them to chairs arranged near the fireplace. I've just received some remarkable news from multiple sources. Elena and William exchanged curious glances as Alexander settled into his favorite armchair, a space that had once been dominated by Isabella's presence, but now felt peaceful and welcoming. The first news comes from Ambassador Rodriguez in Astoria. Alexander began, his eyes twinkling. It seems your handling of the trade negotiations, Elena, has impressed King Ferdinand so much that he's requesting your mediation in a dispute with their northern neighbors. They specifically asked for the princess with the golden touch for diplomacy. Elena flushed with pride and surprise. 6 months ago, she had been struggling to find her place within royal protocols. Now, her reputation was spreading beyond Valdoria's borders. The second piece of news, Alexander continued, comes from our own citizens. The palace has been flooded with letters praising the changes in how we engage with public concerns. Specifically, they appreciate Elena's monthly visits to different regions and William's new initiative for direct citizen consultation. William leaned forward, intrigued. What kind of response have we seen to the accessibility programs? Alexander consulted his notes, clearly pleased to report positive developments. Hospital waiting times in rural areas have decreased by 30% since Elena initiated the mobile healthcare program. University enrollment has increased significantly thanks to the new scholarship fund she established. And, perhaps most remarkably, public trust in the monarchy has reached levels not seen since my grandfather's reign. The transformation was indeed remarkable. Where Isabella's approach had focused on maintaining distance and mystique, Elena had embraced transparency and direct engagement. The results spoke for themselves in measurable improvements to citizens' lives. There's more, Alexander added, his expression growing more serious. I've received a letter from Henry. Both Elena and William straightened with interest. Henry had left Valdoria 3 months earlier to travel extensively, seeking to discover his identity beyond the false promises of a crown that was never his to inherit. He's in Merchants Bay, working with relief organizations helping refugees from the Civil War in Northland, Alexander reported. His letter describes finding purpose in service that has nothing to do with royal title or inherited privilege. Elena's eyes moistened with emotion. Is he happy? Alexander's voice carried paternal pride as he read from Henry's letter. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm earning respect through my own actions rather than my supposed birthright. The work is difficult, but it's real in a way that palace life never was. William nodded approvingly. He's found his own path. That takes real courage. Indeed, Alexander agreed. He also mentions meeting a doctor named Sarah who shares his passion for humanitarian work. It seems our Henry may have found both purpose and love far from palace walls. The news brought warmth to all 3 listeners. Henry's journey from entitled prince to self-made humanitarian represented the best possible outcome from the crisis that had torn their family apart. And Isabella? Elena asked quietly, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Alexander's expression grew thoughtful. Sir James reports that she's settled into life at Rosemary Cottage more peacefully than we might have expected. She's been gardening extensively and has begun writing what she describes as her memoirs. That could be problematic, William observed with concern. Actually, Sir James believes it's therapeutic for her, Alexander replied. The writing process seems to be helping her process years of choices she's never honestly examined before. Elena felt a mixture of relief and sympathy for the woman who had once viewed her as a threat. Perhaps honesty, even delayed, can still bring healing. Their conversation was interrupted by Sir James himself, who knocked and entered with obvious excitement. "Your Majesties, forgive the interruption, but I thought you'd want to hear this immediately. The Royal Council has just finished reviewing the final reports from the constitutional scholars regarding Princess Elena's expanded role." Alexander leaned forward eagerly. "And their conclusion?" "Unanimous approval for the creation of the new position of Royal Chancellor for Domestic and International Affairs," Sir James announced with a broad smile. "The precedent has been established, and the legal framework is now in place." Elena felt her breath catch. The position would formalize everything she had been doing informally, giving her the authority to implement changes on a scale she had never imagined possible. "The Council emphasized," Sir James continued, "that this represents not just recognition of Princess Elena's contributions, but a modernization of the monarchy itself. They believe future generations will look back on this innovation as a crucial evolution in royal governance." William reached for Elena's hand, his pride evident. "Chancellor Elena, it has a nice ring to it." Alexander stood, moving to an ornate wooden box on his desk. "If you're willing to accept this responsibility, Elena, then it's time to make it official." He opened the box to reveal a magnificent sapphire pendant on a chain of white gold, clearly a piece commissioned specifically for this moment. The design was both traditional and innovative, incorporating symbols of both domestic and international authority. "This is the seal of the Royal Chancellor," Alexander explained, "designed to honor both your common origins and your royal destiny. The sapphires represent wisdom, while the white gold signifies purity of purpose." Elena stood slowly, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. 6 months ago, she had been focused simply on supporting William in his royal duties. Now, she was being offered a chance to reshape how the monarchy served its people. "I'm honored beyond words," she said softly. "But I want to be certain this serves the kingdom's needs, not just my own fulfillment." Alexander's smile reflected decades of wisdom earned through both triumph and failure. "Elena, you've already proven that those two things are the same for you. Your fulfillment comes through service, which is what makes you uniquely qualified for this role." As Alexander placed the pendant around Elena's neck, the weight of the sapphires seemed to symbolize both the burden and the privilege of the responsibility she was accepting. "There's one more piece of news," Alexander said, returning to his desk. "The Archbishop has proposed a formal ceremony to celebrate both William's confirmation as Crown Prince and Elena's investiture as Royal Chancellor. He suggests timing it to coincide with the Harvest Festival, when representatives from every region will already be gathered in the capital." Elena looked at William, reading agreement in his expression. "A celebration of new beginnings," she mused. "I think that's perfect." As they finalized plans for the ceremony, Elena reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. A crisis born of deception and betrayal had ultimately created opportunities for growth and positive change that might never have emerged otherwise. The monarchy that would emerge from this period would be stronger, more connected to its people, and more capable of adapting to changing times. Isabella's schemes had inadvertently created the very thing she had always opposed: a royal family that derived its power from authentic service rather than inherited privilege. Later that evening, as Elena and William walked through the palace gardens where so many crucial conversations had taken place, they encountered a letter that Sir James had left on Elena's desk. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the return address indicated it came from Rosemary Cottage. Elena opened it carefully, unsure what to expect from Isabella's first direct communication since her departure. "Your Royal Highness," the letter began formally, "I write not seeking forgiveness, which I know I haven't earned, but to acknowledge truths I've spent months avoiding. My actions caused immense pain to everyone who should have been able to trust me. More importantly, they prevented the monarchy from becoming what it could have been under honest leadership. Watching from a distance as you and Prince William have transformed how our kingdom operates has been both humbling and enlightening. I see now what authentic service looks like, and I understand how far short of that ideal I fell. I make no excuses for my choices, but I wanted you to know that I recognize the good work you're doing. Valdoria is fortunate to have leaders who put the kingdom's welfare above their own ambitions. I wish you all the happiness and success that genuine virtue deserves. Respectfully, Isabella. Elena read the letter twice before handing it to William, who read it with raised eyebrows. I never expected that, he admitted. Perhaps that's what redemption looks like, Elena replied thoughtfully. Not dramatic gestures, but quiet acknowledgement and acceptance of truth. As they continued their evening walk, Elena felt a profound sense of completion. The crisis that had threatened to destroy their family had instead revealed its true strength. Truth had proven more powerful than deception, authentic love more enduring than manipulative schemes, and genuine service more rewarding than inherited privilege. The future stretched before them bright with possibility, built on foundations that would endure because they were based on the bedrock of honesty, compassion, and unwavering commitment to the greater good. The kingdom of Valdoria had not just survived its crisis. It had emerged stronger, wiser, and more unified than ever before. In the distance, the lights of the capital city twinkled like promises of the better tomorrow that Elena, William, and Alexander were working together to create.